The wind curled over the English coast like a warning, carrying with it the distant beat of oars. Villagers looked toward the horizon, where the sea shimmered under a pale sun, and there, rising like dark wings from the water, came ships unlike anything their eyes had ever known. Sleek, silent, relentless. As the first longship touched the shore, the world seemed to hold its breath. Men stepped onto the sand, tall, armored, their shadows stretching like spears. No one knew their names. No one knew their purpose. But England would soon learn one thing. The North had come to conquer. Long before the clash of shield against shield, England stood divided, not by one enemy, but by itself. 4 kingdoms, each proud, each fragile, drifting like islands in a restless tide. Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex, brothers in land, but strangers in unity. Their kings argued over borders, while their nobles whispered of old feuds. The peace they held was thin, a delicate thread stretched between rival ambitions. Across the sea, another world was awakening. Villages carved into fjords echoed with the ring of iron. Children grew up not with lullabies, but with tales of storms, sagas, and the restless need to roam. From these lands rose warriors shaped by cold winds and harsher fates. Men who saw the horizon not as a boundary, but an invitation. And so, while England debated, the North prepared. The rivers of Europe had already tasted Viking oars. The coasts of Francia had witnessed their fury. But England remained unaware of the tide building beyond sight, a tide that would soon sweep across its fields, its monasteries, its very soul. The moment of calm was ending. A new age was breaking. And the sound of that breaking began with a single, distant sail.
It began quietly, so quietly that the English believed it nothing more than another raid, another fleeting brush with northern wanderers. Monks whispered prayers, villages shuttered their doors, and lords sent small war bands to watch the coast. But this time the longships did not come in 10s or 20s. They came in hundreds. In the winter of 865, as frost settled over England's farmlands, the sea delivered a force unlike any the island had ever faced. Later generations would call it the Great Heathen Army, a name born from awe and dread. But to those who first saw them land, they were simply an ocean of iron emerging from the fog. Ship after ship touched the sand, their prows carved like beasts ready to leap forward. Warriors stepped out with the calm assurance of men who had crossed the world and found no fear in it. Their commanders, sons of legendary leaders, brothers bound by vengeance, ambition, and fate, surveyed England as if measuring a prize already theirs. They did not strike immediately. They studied. They observed. They learned the weaknesses of every kingdom. Then they moved. Their first target was Northumbria, a kingdom torn by civil war. Its own rulers fought each other, blind to the storm gathering beyond their walls. And so, when the Vikings advanced, they cut through the land not as an army, but as a tide, silently, inevitably swallowing everything in its path. Cities fell before sunrise. Towns surrendered before their messengers could cry for help. The Vikings did not come as raiders searching for plunder. They came as conquerors seeking land, power, and legacy. Their camps rose quickly, sprawling across fields with an efficiency England had never witnessed. From these bases, they launched strikes deeper into the country, moving across old roads, rivers, and trading paths with effortless precision. Rumors spread faster than their march. of warriors who fought as if guided by the gods, of leaders whose strategies unfolded like a game already won. Villagers fled before even seeing them, carrying stories that blurred reality and myth. Mercia trembled, East Anglia faltered, and Wessex, proud Wessex, watched the horizon with the fear it dared not admit. For England, the arrival of the Great Army was not merely the coming of invaders. It was the beginning of a transformation. The moment when the island's fate slipped from familiar hands and into the grasp of strangers from the north. What followed would reshape history. What followed would test kings, kingdoms, and courage itself. The Great Army had arrived, and England had no choice but to face it. But to understand how the Vikings crushed England's armies, one must first understand the way they moved, the way they thought, and the way they fought. Their warfare was not a matter of brute strength alone. It was a choreography shaped by sea, storm, and survival. Their longships were their great advantage, sleek vessels that glided across rivers shallow enough for horses to walk through. With them, the Vikings appeared where no army should appear, along quiet riverbanks, deep inland, beside sleeping monasteries, behind defensive lines that believed themselves safe. They struck not where defenses were strong, but where no defenses existed at all. When they marched, they moved like a single mind. Their camps were arranged with a precision that astonished the English. Tents in neat rows, shields stacked like wooden walls, watchfires placed so every shadow was accounted for. Within these camps, warriors sharpened their blades with the same calm focus as farmers tending fields. War was not their burden, it was their craft. On the battlefield, their method unfolded like a storm. First came the shield wall, an unbroken line of oak and iron. Shields overlapped like the scales of a serpent, forming a living barricade that advanced and retreated in fluid waves. Behind this wall, spears darted forward, swift and precise. The English, who fought with courage but little coordination, found themselves pushing against a barrier that did not break, did not falter, did not fear. Their leaders walked the lines, speaking not as distant rulers, but as brothers in arms. Their words were simple, steadying, carrying the weight of countless seas crossed. A Viking entered battle knowing that the man beside him was not merely an ally, but a lifeline. In this unity lay their quiet power. Then, when the moment was right, the storm broke open. The shield wall would shift, just slightly, just enough, and from its edges erupted warriors who fought with staggering ferocity. Some wielded axes heavy enough to cleave through helmets. Others fought with slender blades that flickered like lightning in the sun. They did not fight in rigid formations. They fought with instinct trained by experience, responding to weakness the instant it appeared. Their movements were not wild. They were controlled, deliberate, honed by years of raids across kingdoms far older and stronger than England. Every gesture had purpose, every strike aimed not only to wound, but to unravel the confidence of those who stood against them. The English feared their silence as much as their shouts. A Viking army could advance with the quiet focus of hunters stalking prey. No drums, no horns, only the steady thud of footsteps and the low murmur of commands. And when they roared, the sound rolled like thunder, carrying with it the memory of 100 fallen shores. But perhaps their greatest strength lay not in their weapons, nor in their ships, but in their minds. They adapted. They learned. After each battle, they altered their approach, changing formations, redirecting routes,
striking at new weak points. While English armies relied on tradition, the Vikings relied on evolution. It was this combination of discipline and unpredictability that left kingdoms trembling. For the English, facing the Vikings was not like facing another army. It was like facing the sea itself, vast, shifting, unstoppable.
To many, the fall of England's armies seemed sudden, as if the Vikings had swept through the land like a gust of winter wind. But the truth ran deeper. England was not defeated in a single moment. It was defeated by a chain of vulnerabilities woven long before the first longship touched its shores. The greatest of these was division. England was not one kingdom, but several, each with its own king, its own ambitions, its own fears. They quarreled over borders while oblivious to the larger danger approaching from across the sea. When the Vikings attacked, decisions that required unity became tangled in politics. Allies hesitated, armies arrived late, messages crossed paths instead of reaching their destinations. Against a force that moved as one, England responded as many. The second weakness lay in leadership. Some English rulers were brave, even noble, but bravery alone cannot stand against an enemy who has crossed half the world to claim victory. Many kings lacked the strategic vision needed to face a threat that changed shape with each encounter. Battles were fought reactively, not proactively. The Vikings dictated the pace, England merely followed. And so, time after time, English armies found themselves defending the wrong places, at the wrong moments, against warriors who had already calculated the end of the story. Another weakness came from the land itself. England, rich with rivers and coastlines, was, unintentionally, the perfect battlefield for Viking mobility. A river that sustained a village was a highway for longships. A coastline that welcomed merchants welcomed raiders just as easily. The English saw these waterways as borders. The Vikings saw them as invitations. Their fortresses were built inland, believing the sea would keep danger at bay. But danger arrived upon the sea with the same ease as wind. When the Vikings bypassed these fortresses, marching straight into undefended regions, the English realized too late that their walls protected everything except what mattered. Then there was the matter of experience. The Vikings were seasoned in warfare, not in theory but in practice. They had baffled Franks, Slavs, and rival Scandinavian clans long before setting foot in England. Every raid taught them something new. Every retreat sharpened their strategy. By the time they faced the English, they were not learning how to win, they were remembering. English armies, bound by tradition, fought as their fathers and grandfathers had fought. They relied on courage, on numbers, on faith. The Vikings relied on precision. But perhaps the most profound reason for England's losses lay in fear. Not the fear of death, for warriors understood death well, but the fear of fighting an enemy who felt unfamiliar, unpredictable, almost otherworldly. Stories grew quickly, stories of warriors who felt no pain, of leaders guided by ancient gods, of ships that arrived even when winds were still. Fear spreads through an army faster than any blade, and once it settles, even the strongest shield wall begins to tremble. English courage never vanished, but courage standing alone, without unity, without direction, without strategy, could not match the cold, relentless march of northern warriors who had come not to flee with plunder, but to stay, to rule, to reshape the island forever. By the time the Great Army swept through Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia, England seemed ready to bow beneath the weight of fate itself.
Kingdoms crumbled like parchment in fire. Cities that once rang with market bells echoed instead with the rhythm of marching feet. The land stood at the edge of a quiet abyss. At this moment, when the Vikings appeared undeniable, unstoppable, the story took a shape no one expected. For there remained one kingdom, one ember glowing faintly in the ashes: Wessex. Wessex was not untouched by the storm. It had faced defeat, loss, and fear just as the others had. Its villages had been burned, its warriors slain, its lands shaken. But within its heart lived a young man who refused to let the embers go dark. His name was Alfred. Not yet the king he would become, Alfred watched the fall of England with the eyes of a scholar and the resolve of a leader who understood that survival often begins in silence. He retreated when he had to, studied when he could, listened even when others demanded action. He understood the Vikings not as monsters, but as men. Men who could be outmaneuvered, outweighted, outlasted. As the great army tightened its grip, Alfred slipped through its fingers, disappearing into the marshlands of Athelney. The marshes were quiet, soft underfoot, cloaked in fog. Here the young leader rebuilt not only his forces, but his spirit. From this hidden refuge, he gathered allies, forged new strategies, and watched the Vikings carefully, learning the patterns that others had missed. England, which had seemed moments from vanishing, began to stir. The Vikings, confident in their victories, turned their focus toward strengthening their new dominions. They divided territories, established camps, built halls where English kings once ruled. In their certainty, they overlooked the resilience slowly taking shape beyond the marshes. The turning point did not come with a single clash of swords. It came with a quiet decision, a decision to rise. From Athelney, Alfred led a renewed force into the countryside, calling upon warriors who believed England still had a future worth fighting for. These men rose from farms, forests, and forgotten villages, gathering beneath a banner that had nearly fallen. The Viking conquest had reached its peak. England had reached its brink. And now, as spring sunlight broke through the fog, the two forces prepared to meet in a decisive struggle that would shape the island's destiny. Victory seemed certain for the North until the moment it no longer was. What followed in the years ahead was not a single triumph, but a slow, determined reclaiming of a nation. Alfred's rise marked the beginning of a new rhythm in the English spirit, a rhythm of resilience, strategy, and unity that had long been missing. The Vikings, unstoppable at the height of their power, now faced an enemy who understood them, adapted to them, and stood unbroken where all others had fallen. England did not vanish. It transformed. The great army carved its mark into the island, through battles won, cities reshaped, and cultures intertwined. Their legacy endured in place names and bloodlines and the very identity of the land. And Alfred, shaped by defeat as much as victory, began the slow forging of what would one day become a unified England. The Vikings had crushed England's armies, but in doing so, they awakened the England that would rise stronger than before.